What is the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality? One morning I woke up to my alarm going off at 6:30 as usual and got up and cooked breakfast. As soon as I sat down to eat, my alarm went off again and I woke up in bed. I dreamed that I woke up and went about my morning routine. That was easily the most disorienting thing I've ever experienced. I am a TA in our college's anatomy class, which takes place in the cadaver lab, dead bodies. Late one night, I am working alone in the cadaver lab and I start to hear a noise. It's hard to tell what the noise sounds like, but it's a consistent muffled noise. So I kind of walk around the room and locate it. Now normally the bodies are all kept in these big metal crates, but at the time we had one more body than we did crate, so one body was in a plastic body bag and that's where the noise was coming from. So I am terrified at this point, all alone in the lab, looking down at this plastic body bag that I can see the outline of the body that presumably is coming back to life because it is definitely making noise. I stood over this body for a solid minute, debating whether I should open the bag, and finally the noise just stops. I got all my stuff together and bolted from the lab. A couple weeks later, the professor tells me to be careful if I ever work on that body because there is a live pacemaker in it, so don't cut into that, and it will vibrate and ring every few hours if it's low on battery. I let out the biggest sigh of relief that we weren't haunted. Once woke up to the sound of heavy breathing and felt as if I was being watched. I couldn't move for a while either. Then I just blurted out my dog's name and kept calling for him. He didn't run over, and as soon as I could get myself to move I went looking for him. Found him sitting in the kitchen doorway, just staring straight forward. I started calling him from right behind him and he wouldn't even turn around. Then I touched his back and he turned to glance at me, but went right back to his trance. A year or so after the fact, I found out that the first thing was probably sleep paralysis. Not too sure about what was going on with the dog though. My friend was about to clean his gun and it was pointed directly at me when it went off. For a few seconds we stood there in shock, him thinking he killed me and me in a state of pure panic. Afterwards we found the bullet embedded in a wall beside me. I will never let him live that shit down. How many beers have you got out of him for the incident so far? Lamau, to be honest, I've gotten a few. Remember the time you almost ducking killed me due to gross negligence? This round's on you, bud. Ducking auditory hallucinations. Fuck those. Was driving down a rural really dark road at night, am super sleep deprived, drunk several of those 240 milligrams caffeine Monster Energy drinks. I didn't have the radio on so it was pretty quiet. Then the whispering started, am confused, don't understand what it is. Try to focus on it, is my stereo not all the way off? Then it started mumbling louder, fuck this ain't good. Then I hear a very clear turn here, but my GPS says continue for 12 miles. Ha 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 ha, fuck that. Nope, fuck that. I turn radio on really loud and continue home. Next physical I mention it to Doc. Am I insane? Both sleep deprivation and caffeine have been known to induce auditory hallucinations individually. Combining both, it's perfectly normal to hear things. If it happens again, come back in. Thought I was going mental. That or you narrowly avoided being ghost murdered. Or he avoided a ghost showing him a sick loot cache or their undiscovered corpse. He really missed his chance to go on a weird adventure that would make him question reality. It was a risky side quest. Should have saved and continued. Not necessarily creepy, but definitely made me question reality. I used to work in a gas station. One regular customer was like night and day. One day he'd be soft-spoken and shy, the next he'd be obnoxious. His cigarette preference also changed from day to day. But he always came in the same work truck with the same guys at the same time of day. One day, he walked in and went straight to the bathroom. A minute later, he walked in again and came to the counter. Twins. It took me 8 months to realize they were twins. And not even identical twins, either. They just looked really similar. Similar story but completely different. I got Chipotle for lunch today. When I got to checkout, the same girl who started my bowl was there. I made some crack about how fast she was to beat me there, and she looked confused. I commented on how she started my food, and now was finishing it. She laughed and pointed at her sister at the beginning of the line. Similar story but completely different. I think I just found my new favorite phrase. My wife and I had a 2-hour drive back from St. Louis to our home during which both of us lost time, Woke up 3 hours later, still an hour and a half away from home, only having used enough gas to go that half hour, and our GPS showed we had been driving our normal route. We still have no ducking idea what happened, but we know we hadn't pulled over and that neither of us had any memory between taking an exit and seeing this one particular billboard for a restaurant we always pass. Still freaks me the fuck out. There was an old man who lived on the road I drove every day to get to the highway. He sat on his front porch drinking his morning coffee, and he always waved at me when I drove by and I always waved back. This went on for the better part of a decade. One day I was talking to my neighbor about how much Mr. So-and-so waving made my morning awesome, and I was glad he was still kicking around. My neighbor says, "Wait, what? He has been dead for 3 years. Never saw him again. Who was I waving at?" Edit, thanks for the silver. And in response to a few questions, I asked my mom later that day, didn't tell her why because my mom hates spooky stories and won't even watch scary movies, if Mr. So-and-so had died and he had in fact been dead for 3 years. Dead Tennessee man's brother found posing as him and freaking out local commuters. Side story, my grandfather and his best friend drove down this stretch of highway every day to school together. One day he waves to his neighbor who was walking on the side and he waved back. 5 miles later he saw his neighbor walking on the highway, thought that's weird, I just saw him. Waved again. Another couple miles. Neighbor still walking there. At this point they're freaked out and hightail it to school. 25 years later they learned the neighbor was a triplet and they did it to freak people out. Classic. After my grandpa died there were sightings of him throughout the neighborhood and everyone said he was smiling. Day 1511, they still think I'm a ghost. Day 1578, I am lost, and whenever I ask for directions they tell me to go towards the light. I had 2 bananas, connected at the stem part. Broke them into 2, ate one, threw out the peel, came back for the other one and it's gone. I live alone. Either I have a rotting banana somewhere in my app or I've gone crazy. Update, it's been weeks, haven't seen smelled the other banana. Ill accept that I just went bananas for that moment frown. Check your loft for monkeys. Ghost monkeys. Carbon monoxide monkeys. Woke up to my granddad stood by the door staring at me. Scared the shit out of me and there was a flash and he was gone. He's been dead about 7 or 8 years at that point. I asked my mum, she said yeah, he often did that. He'd wake my nan up for work by knocking on the window. Mum, dead grandpa stared at me through my door today. Yeah, he does that. Make sure to close the blinds before a fap. When I was a kid between 8 or 9, I used to wake up every night to headlights coming through my bedroom window. The lights would stop and turn off, not as if a car drove by but as if they were turned off. Then the long shadows of a man, as if were looking through my window, would pass by and stop in front of my window. I would lay really still and pretend nothing happened, every night for months. Eventually I convinced myself it was imagination. Now that I think back, it stopped when my stepdad moved in. My mom was single, but I was convinced it wasn't real. Across the street lived my best friend whose mom was also single and she refused to sleep in her bedroom. Her window faced my window. She told me years later it was because every night a man would park in her side yard and walk over to my yard. The long shadows were from the light in her yard. She eventually decided it was my dad checking on us and never told me until I was a teenager. It wasn't my dad, I asked him. So I thought I was crazy and hallucinating for years, and perhaps I wasn't. Our 2 kids were having odd dreams at the same time every night. See a dream and the next day it becomes reality. Even little details like the clothes me and my brother wore. I get this kinda shit too. Weird things I'll have in a dream, then it happens within the next few days. Stuff like someone saying something specific or other stuff that's slipping my mind. ATM. I get this too. Mine is usually always a few weeks, months later, so I always get wicked deja vu until I can figure out why I remember it. It's always super mundane, but it's usually something random enough that I think it was a dream until it happens. It happened just the other day where my girlfriend was showing me something and I asked her, "Haven't you shown me this before?" When what it was had just arrived.